You're listening to the Ask Drone U podcast. You ask, we answer your drone questions. Whether you're here to turn your passion into profit or you simply fly for fun, we're a community of learners and teachers who aspire to achieve greatness. We are
Drone U.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another fantastic episode of Ask Drone U. I'll be your host today. You know who I am. I'm also here with Mr. Jon McBride from Rocky Mountain Unmanned Systems to help us better understand the Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual and the practicality therein. We'll be discussing this new small sensor and be asking the questions, well, is it actually useful as a tool in UAS verticals such as public safety, search and rescue, roofing inspections, solar inspections, and some other unique uses. We will also be hearing via text message from Andrew Dean of Mile High Drones to be confirming whether he would be using a Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual for his commercial roof inspections. So, Jon McBride, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey, thank you for having me, Paul. Again, always good to try and get information out there and help the community out in making great decisions on what they're buying, purchasing, and understanding their workflows. So this would be a great unit to talk about today.
Couldn't agree more. So it seems that you have a Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual with you today. Oh, there she is.
Yeah, I do. We received these, got them in, did initial tests, initial comparison right off the get-go, and then I recently put out a video that kind of talked a little bit about a perspective as well, using it in inspection and everything, and then public service specifically. But we'll discuss that today.
It seems like there's actually a lot of conflicting information on the practical use of this dual camera, and that's why I'm excited to have you on the show. So can you help us understand more of what the Mavic 2 Enterprise, the features are, and what are we really looking at spec-wise from this camera? Because it does seem like it's an awfully small sensor.
Well, the big thing being small sensor, there's a lot of thought process that has to go into creating something so small, and the Mavic 2 Enterprise is indeed small. What I have found is that a lot of public service guys have opted to use the Mavic, and this is previous Mavics, to quick deployment, being able to use this quietly, can't be seen so easily, and we are touching a bit more. I'll push it a little bit more towards the public service use than anything else. But we have to consider, yes, that sensor size. The sensor is a 160 by 120 size pixeled sensor, which isn't a really huge sensor for picking up things at a distance or far away. This is a similar sensor to what they have in some of that FLIR makes in some of the handheld units they use, which is used for radiometric inspection in some cases. But the difference is that what we can do is be very close to a subject when we're getting absolute temperature, focus it, which is a really important part of doing radiometric inspection, to be able to focus it, and as well as understand the detection range to get absolute temperature. And so these can be difficult in that side. So the XT2, the Z30, or the XT, and other cameras that are out there use a little bit larger sensor size, but we just have to understand the workflow, and that's what we're hoping to understand today, is what it's going to be good for.
Yeah, I am really interested in that because I've heard a lot of similar stories as well, that the portability of the Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual is really for public safety officers, police officers, EMS, and fire, that it does have that portability and that stealth. And I do want to talk about, how useful it is because, you compare this camera to the XT2, and so for example, in search and rescue, how practical is this drone for, say, a search and rescue mission, especially in areas like Wisconsin, Virginia, Washington State, where you have tree heights ranging from 60 to 100 feet. So how useful is this camera in those situations, especially compared to the XT2?
Well, I would probably not put them in those types of scenarios where the height distance away from a possible, which you do not know where the subject is. That's the whole point of search and rescue. You are searching, and sometimes you have very limited information on being able to find a person. It's very limited. They can walk off to anywhere. Well, this detection range isn't going to be any good less than probably 100 feet. So if we are any higher than that, that can be very difficult to try and see an actual subject at more than 100 feet. And that's just a number. I'm not saying that that is not usable or can't be done any higher. It's just that the expectation is that I'm going to be able to go and search for people with this lower resolution sensor, and your likelihood of success might be very low. But what can we do with it? And when we're talking about those specific environments, I'm here in Utah. I have big mountains, big trees, large spaces to search. And it's easier for me to fly a ship like this and do smaller areas in which maybe a manned helicopter can't get to, maybe personnel on the ground can't get to, and hopefully I can fly close enough to get some detection if needed. And we have to understand a lot of things about thermal in order to make decisions based on anomalies that we see to say that's a guy or that's not a guy. So having a detection range that's really important, we have to understand that is where we're at. And we're going to do a real small comparison clip for you, Paul, to show what it would look like here. And what we're seeing is the availability of thermal to see a detection, and then maybe turning on the spotlight, which, we can turn the spotlight on and maybe confirm it with the RGB camera with that lower grade resolution in thermal. So that could be a really good workflow. But again, across the board, you probably want to use a little bit more higher sensor for higher detection range or a higher, broader search area.
So if we were searching an area, say at 100 feet, that would be in, say, the very best conditions to find someone. So sub 24 hours, high contrasting temperature difference.
Yes.
I mean, what would you really be flying? What altitude would you really fly with this if you were doing search and rescue, where it's going to be a lot more usable?
Well, this is more spot checking than it is doing a broad search. You with me on that? Definitely spot checking instead of an open, broad, just flying around looking for somebody. This is when we bring this out, is when we have a possibility of again, having somebody that fell off a cliff, and you nailed it. You have to have enough thermal delta between a subject and the background or anything that gives us the ability to detect something warm in its environment. If you don't have that, that would be very difficult to see with any thermal camera. It doesn't matter what you use, it can be very difficult.
I think it's really important that we're going over these things so people do know the real life limitations, because I think it's a really bad idea when people show up to a search and rescue scene and would pull this out and say, hey, I have a thermal drone, I can make a big difference. And I really try to stress to people that, with search and rescue, it's one of those things you really should not get involved in unless you're ready to look the victim's mother in the eye and say, I did not find your son or daughter, and be completely, okay with that. And I think that kind of strikes deep with a lot of people, and I think people need to be realistic about what it can and can't do. But recently, in that video that you had published, that police officer said that this drone could be really helpful in the scene of an accident, where if there was a rollover and people had been ejected from the vehicle in low light scenes or in a scene that would be difficult to search, he said this could actually be a very viable solution. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, you got to remember, as a first responder tool, not later showing up for searching for a guy that's been gone for 2 days. As a first responder tool, this has some serious advantages with the thermal size sensor that we're talking about. In that case, I mean, if you have a rollover, what is the likelihood of somebody ejecting 500 feet away? Probably not. You're probably going to be within a space, but it can still be very dark, tall weeds, things like that. So his scenario that he gave us is basically a first responder getting there, seeing ejected people, and maybe possibly getting the people there that need to help and assist with the stuff, but then continuing a search real quick to make sure. And how big could that area be? Well, I would say accidents don't spread out hundreds and hundreds of feet, but there's a possibility that somebody has been ejected 40 feet into weeds or tall brush or something like that might be difficult to see. And that was his scenario.
So maybe it's also potentially good then to find potential suspects if they were in a car chase that ended in a field at night and they were having difficulty seeing. Would that be helpful as well?
That would be helpful. Like I said, the whole thing is that a lot of the disadvantage of flying a drone at night is the fact that our camera is always pointed down, looking for that exact scenario, the bad guy, or looking for something. It's always pointed down. And when we point down, we don't see things in the air like trees, telephone poles, other things, because we're constantly looking straight down. When we slide kind of an angle to include the horizon a little bit, that can also be very difficult in thermal to understand what the actual further distance items are showing up to get better detection on the ground. So we just have to be very careful in areas that might be wide open, great. That might have a ton of trees, and trying to fly over the trees to detect somebody, that might be a little bit more difficult, but totally doable. I mean, totally doable with this sensor.
So let me ask you one more question. If the police wanted to potentially clear a building or a vehicle that had been barricaded for some reason, would this be a good use of the Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual?
Yes. So there is definitely some use cases that are out there from my public service customers that have put cages on the Mavic. As we discussed, they use the original Mavic. They're clearing a parking garage 3 flights down. So the team is up on the top, and they're trying to get down and look into a parking garage. This would be a really good, again, just being a Mavic in general, small cages, getting and flying through that space. Throw on the thermal camera for dark areas just to verify that there might not be something there. It's perfect. So yeah, houses and buildings, if you can stand to get the connection good enough, will be great. You know, this would be well suited for that.
That's awesome. So would the Mavic 2 ED be good for a solar inspection then? Is that even plausible?
Same thing. We're right back to the same question. How far away do you have to be to detect an anomaly that we can verify or see? Well, as we had discussed on the phone earlier, when you're talking about large areas that are going to be hundreds of acres, and because of the field of view and the detection capability, maybe not well suited for large, 50 megawatt spaces.
What is the field of view on the M2ED?
57 degrees.
Very wide.
Yeah, it's pretty wide. So, and don't quote me on that, but it's wide enough that it's not going to be really close knit. You know,
you said 57, right? Shh. You were right. You were right.
Things that stay in my head, Paul. It just bing. So yeah, 57 degrees is how wide we can see, and if we get that up at 200 or 300 feet, and the detection of the resolution is very low, yeah, we probably are not going to be very helpful in doing that. But what could this work for? Let's talk about this again in the inspection of solar panels. Commercial spaces, small commercial places, small residential places that have solar panels installed on their roofs. We can get close enough. We can do a quick inspection. So I don't see this I totally see this being used in that area of inspection for real quick. There might be something wrong with the cell or a photo cell or a panel or a string or a number of things.
But just to clarify, this is not going to be enough data to say take a bunch of pictures of a solar panel and throw it into Raptor Maps and get that pretty report saying, hey, this is which cell is broken and why, and you need to go fix it. This is more so, hey, your buddy's solar panel is broken and you want to be the cool guy in the neighborhood and be like, hey, guy, number 3's broken, dude. Just telling you.
Yeah, and even if you have if you're an installer of those types of systems and you install them, verifying the work, flying close like that, perfect for that. But no, I did a solar panel video a couple of years ago, 550 acres, 220,000 panels. I just don't think that this has the power to do that in that scape. Andrew Dean, who you had mentioned, would likely verify that there is some issues in doing roof inspections and things like that, to where distances are really important. And in my thermography experience, same thing, having the distance and verifying and checking. Now, that's really important.
Now, really quick, if I was a claims adjuster, though, for an insurance company and a hailstorm had just come through and I want to see the damage to the solar array on the house, and I just need enough information to know whether they're working or not as to whether to total the system out, to replace it for said customer. Would I be able to do that with the Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual?
I would think so. It's a perfect scenario for that. It's perfect for that. And so small area, just like we talked about, small search areas, small inspection areas, getting close enough. Again, on the video I did earlier, looking at, because you brought up a swamp cooler, to take a look at roofs, see things like that. As long as we can get close enough with the detection range here, we should be able to viably make some choices on, yeah, I need to get up there and fix my swamp cooler because your house is hot. I brought over my Dual to check your swamp cooler, and I could verify a number of things by just looking at it in thermal to make that guesstimate. Now, if we go a little bit more technical into the radiometric side of things, then it being a fully radiometric camera, it's not quite that, but we have to understand that there is basically settings that we can do.
But it's not radiometric, right? Because radiometric is either is or it isn't. It's pretty...
Yes, it either is or isn't. And radiometric in the thermal world is very misunderstood. That is a very misunderstood term. Just because it shows temperature does not mean that the camera is radiometric.
Radiometric, here, I'll give you a chance to correct me, John, for the whole world to see, all right? Let's see if I understand it correctly, and you can help me understand. I thought a radiometric thermal camera is a thermal camera whose sensor is calibrated vis-a-vis the exterior or ambient temperature around said camera. So the camera is calibrated, but also has ways to measure temperature other than the camera itself to verify the measurements it's seeing in temperature. Is that correct?
Well, you're pretty damn close. So, yeah, good job, Paul. Let me say it this way for the photographers of the world. When you, when you bring in a thermal camera to do radiometric data and radiometric information, what we're doing is natively on the camera, we are increasing our photograph for the environment. So things like ISO, aperture, all of that is natively stored at the time of the image on the shot. If these settings are not set up right, you're going to miss information. You'll be overexposed. You cannot gain that information back. Are we with me on that? Does that make sense?
Yes.
So if you can't dial in emissivity, if you can't dial in reflective temperature, if you can't dial in all of these things that are native on the shot when it's taken, then put into FLIR tools and then slightly manipulate it a little bit, then our accuracy of absolute temperature goes way down. Well, because you can't do that real time on the Dual, that also, yeah, I can see some temperature. In some cases, there's some things that are pretty damn close. But if I look at other things, it's not going to be as accurate as it possibly could without being able to dial in those numbers.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Which makes me wonder then how useful it is for my last unique specific use case, which is recently we had a contractor at our South Carolina mapping class, and he was interested in using the Dual because they essentially do road construction. They're literally building roads, laying out asphalt, and he told me that he wants to be able to monitor the temperature of the asphalt right before it's laid, because essentially if it gets below, say, 300 degrees, there's going to be a cold spot. That cold spot ends up turning into the potholes that we know because the material didn't physically bind properly. So he was wondering, if I use a Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual, would I be able to live monitor the release of asphalt to make sure and confirm that all the asphalt actually did bind and was laid properly, because they can save a lot of money if they just fix the problem right then and there.
Okay, so you have relative comparison here that could be very helpful in doing that workflow, and then you have an absolute temperature number. Because again, I just explained how we cannot dial in certain emissivities of product. We can have a huge variance in absolute temperature. So that variance, if he needs exactly 300 degrees, and I can't dial in the emissivity of asphalt, which has a different emissivity number of my skin or my shirt or something shiny metal, these are different numbers, and those numbers have to be dialed into the camera in order to give us the best overall absolute temperature. And that that is a huge factor in that type of workflow. And if you can't do it, then you can have a huge discrepancy of maybe 20 or 30 degrees. And if that is really important, to be 20 or 30, 20 degrees means it's not going to stick together less than other. That is the difference. That is, we may be able to get close, but not perfect.
So unless you're an HVAC, maybe you're a claims adjuster or you're a police officer, sounds like there's a lot of limitations to this little bird.
Yeah, when it comes down to limitation, we're talking about, will it replace? No, it will not replace. It will embellish. It will help. It will do good in helping in that space. But to replace it as a $100,000 thermal inspection camera, not gonna do that. That's why it's 3,000 or whatever it is. It's not.
But just to summarize, if we can fly super low and it's not an inspection kind of grade job, it might be useful in some unique cases, but often than not, your best bet really is getting a radiometric camera. In fact, to reiterate this, you mentioned Andrew Dean, and I wanted to read. So Andrew Dean, who owns Mile High Drones, does a lot of commercial roof inspections. I know you're familiar with him as well.
Oh yeah, he's one of my customers. So I mean, he's bought thermal cameras and asked me a lot of questions. So it's
awesome. So he just said, in the inspection world, parentheses, our bread and butter, end parentheses, we deal with large industrial commercial inspections, and at the 336 resolution, you are struggling to accurately define issues. If you are able to use appropriate thermography tactics to identify issues, the 336 limits you by failing to allow you to identify the boundaries or possible causes. With absolute certainty, we know that we will never use a 160 resolution system aerially for any type of inspection. We would like to offer caution to those new to thermography or possibly considering it now that you can buy a 160 camera for a few thousand. Be very careful about claiming to be able to identify any sort of anomalies in industrial or commercial applications. The resolution is so poor that even with 5 years of field experience in this industry and over 1,500 commercial inspections, I would not feel comfortable trying to make heads or tails of a Mavic image.
Well, let's look at a Mavic image, and that I mean, we are going to summarize basically what we got, but let's just look at a image from the Mavic, and let's try to decide a couple of things here, specifically in my kitchen that it's pointing at. So as we show here on this image, I can see a couple of good hot spots in there. We can see that. And if I was to decide what was the hottest item, we can see it relatively giving me the light up in the left corner, and then I have a light underneath my stove. Now, if we didn't have the MSX feature turned on here, and we can see all that outline, let me turn that off to IR only. This is what we get.
Oh, yeah. Hard to see the detail, that there's even cabinets there.
There's nothing discernible in that same image to be able to decide whether or not I have something in the way or difficult to see or even doing inspection. And if we turn on the temperature, and I'm only, maybe 15 feet away from my light here, and if I turn on the temperature sensor, and we're going to get some temperature here. Hold on one second. Sorry.
All good.
And I just put my box around that spot. I'm showing a temperature of max of 93 degrees on there, and that's just the box sensor up here. So it has a really cool tool there to give us an average, and we can see that down here on the bottom to where it's showing me the highest temperature, lowest temperature, and medium temperature. But because I cannot actually dial in other numbers, it's the absolute temperature that's really important here to make a decision. I'm going to guess that at 92 degrees, well, the light is made of glass. That could be a number. I can't dial that in to get that absolute temperature right.
Yeah.
And so the MSX feature, and we'll just talk about that for a second, is a blending of the two cameras together. Being able to have this lower grade resolution, as Andrew said, might be difficult, but the MSX isn't always available on all cameras that FLIR makes for UAS. specifically an XT by itself, you don't have that ability to pull out some of those details or look at some things that might show that. So,
gotcha. So what does the Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual cost? What is when you take it home, what is the actual cost?
Did you see my face?
Oh man.
I hate to say it, but I'm not the sales guy of my RMUS. It's somewhere around that 2,800.
I'll try to buy it off the DJI website and see what. Oh no, you have to contact them. You can't even buy it.
So it's sub $3,000. A great tool. The fact that they came out with that number initially when discussing what it was going to sell for public service, excellent. I mean, excellent. We just can't. I just don't know. Exactly. With enough people with budgets that are difficult to get, hard to get authorizations for, that this could finally get the drone that they may need or has some better functions, with the thermal camera. And we have to be very clear. I said this in my video also. This is a 12 megapixel camera. It's the same sensor on the RGB sensor of what is on a Mavic Air or an Inspire X3 camera. It's identical in the sensor size. So, which is a lot of people are like, man, we have to have an Inspire to fly around. Whoa. Yeah. Here's your replacement, man. And it includes a thermal camera, which can be used. We're seeing a lot of things coming out as people have been receiving them in the public service space, seeing a lot of use cases, a lot of videos. We want to be able to, again, understand the workflow and capability. But no, overall, the price point of this at $3,000 or so by itself, absolutely amazing.
My final question for you as I have to end the show, are you seeing firefighters utilizing the M2 ED to see hotspots and roofs when they're responding to a building on fire?
Okay, yeah, good question. And again, I'll end this with another thermography look at this. When we're looking for hotspots, we're doing exactly that. We're looking for hotspots. That is a relative question. That is not an absolute question. With me on that?
Yeah, 100%.
Is it hotter than this piece over there? That doesn't necessarily mean...
Is my hotspot here relatively warmer than over here?
Yeah, but does that, what you just showed, does that mean that this is 500 degrees and this is 100 degrees? Exactly. Could you just use it for a quick hotspot check? Yeah, that just looks hotter than this does. We better go check it out. That is a perfect scenario of a workflow that is quick, simple, and easy to find hotspots on a roof or coals that have been dispersed around an area that's already been burning, wildfire type stuff. If it's really close, we can just do a scan really quickly because this thing will still be able to see through smoke, which makes that really beneficial. So yeah, I mean, as again, we just understand that we have to be kind of close to things in order for this sensor to work well. And that's the big thing.
Well, Jon, thank you so much for joining us on the show. We really do appreciate you outlining what we can do and what we can't do.
Absolutely.
And guys, if you want to check out Jon, go to his website. It's rmus.com. Is that correct, Jon?
That is correct.
Awesome. And you can pick up a Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual if you would like to get one. And if you did hear the show and you end up picking up one of these drones, make sure to let them know at RMUS that you heard it here on Ask Drone U. On that bombshell, Jon, that is going to do it for us today. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Don't be afraid to subscribe, whether you're listening on iTunes, Spotify, or Stitcher. That is going to do it for us today on that puppy note. And you're listening to another episode of Ask Drone U.